Welcome, everybody. I appreciate these three Christian brothers joining me on this Christian Chronicle live interview to discuss a letter that they're a part of. And I thought maybe we'll start with just letting each of you introduce yourselves, and then we'll get talking a little bit about the reason for the Zoom.
Okay, I'm Dr. Warren Blakney, the minister of the North Peoria Church of Christ here in Tulsa. I'm also the president of the Urban League and past president of the NAACP.
Great.
My name is David Watkins. I preach for the Twin City Church of Christ in Texarkana, Texas, and the Bridge Community Church in Longview, Texas, and also past president of the Bowie County Democratic Party, and sit on a number of community boards in my community.
Okay. Did you say, is that Texarkana, Texas, did you say?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Great.
Yes.
Great. And Brother Price?
Yes. Good morning.
Good morning.
I hope it's not inappropriate to say good morning to my brothers.
Yes, sir.
At home. My name is Richard Price. I'm the minister of the North Green Street Church of Christ here in Tupelo, Mississippi. I am the chairman of the Mayor's Outreach Task Force here in the city of Tupelo. I am also on the executive committee for the Tupelo Lee County Democratic Party.
Thank you. Well, I understand that the three of you are involved with a letter that's being distributed among leaders of Churches of Christ, and I'm not sure who would want to start, but maybe someone kind of tell us a little bit about what that letter is all about and how it came to be.
I'm going to defer to Dr. Price and David and let them begin first, and then I'll come in a little bit later on. Dr. Price.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you to go first, Dr.
Okay. Well, I just started off, and we go from there. There are about 56 to 60 preachers sometimes that we meet on a call by Zoom, and I sponsor that call. And all that's going on around us, it's impactful for all of us. And so the last Zoom call that we had, we talked about putting some kind of effort together, writing something out of that nature. Of that call came this call that we're having today. And the architects of the letter and what we're going to be giving it is primarily Dr. Price and others who work with him to make sure that we have within the context of that letter what we need to say as preachers. And so because he generated it at the request per us on that Wednesday call, then he and David are the key guys working through this process. So that's how we come about having this letter, and we want to make sure it's available to people. So Dr. Price, if you can chime in, and David, y'all can chime in and go from there.
Okay.
We have been working under the advisement. The Bible talks about God of our fathers, and Dr. Blakeney and so many other ministers and so many women of the faith have been so instrumental in being on the scene to speak for God at moments where we needed a voice. And we didn't want to do anything to ever try to erase, but to celebrate what I would like to call prophetic voices in the Church of Christ who have been there, and they have a wealth of experience, and they know how to handle these things while still staying. Sorry, guys, I'm getting calls from everywhere. They know how to handle these things while still staying rooted in the faith. And so it's because of his Wednesday call and God using him to do that we've been able to get together. And younger preachers like myself, we are trying to learn how to advocate through the experience of our fathers, our spiritual fathers in the faith, to make a soft impression, because this is such a special time. We've never had this moment in history from a place of time. And then we've never had this moment in history in the movement of reconciliation, where so many people on all sides are saying the same thing. without without someone pulling or tugging. And so it was through prayer and through the support of our fathers, through the advisement, that we put together a letter, because we know that written form is a soft way to advocate for things. The written form, people can respond to it anyway, but once it's out there and done the right way, it speaks for itself. And so through their mentorship, we've been sculpting a letter, and David has been key with that. And we thought that we would ask ministers, church leaders, church workers who felt that that letter spoke to what they might be trying to express, but they didn't know how to get it out. It spoke to the issue and still was rooted in the faith, and it's a faith-rooted action. And so right now, the letter has several pages of signatures from many demographics of preachers, not just Black and brown, but Asian preachers. And there's even a contingency amongst Latino preachers who want to sign. I'm sure if we left the letter out there for the rest of the year, it would just keep going and going and going. And I'm celebrating what our mentors, through the years, we've watched these guys like Dr. Blakeney, who I have family members in his church who celebrate his leadership and celebrate the sensibility he brings to the ministry, and has changed their life, quite frankly. But we're celebrating and we're operating with the advisement of our mentors to try to produce some things from our skill set that would still fit in line with the thread and fabric of what God wants for us. The last thing I want to say about that is we wanted to do the letter because we realized that we all have a level of influence, and we didn't want the younger generation that has been not just in this moment very expressive about their real feelings about this type of sin. We didn't want them to think that we were just hiding in the sand. And we certainly didn't want the world to begin to say, this is wrong, and then we came in at the back end. And it's been very encouraging for them. And we're trying to help them through this letter know how to advocate and be the voices that we need to be, without them getting so frustrated that they're one of the young people tearing things down, to the extent where they get arrested or they get something on their record that'll ruin their life. So that's kind of what our thought process was. David, I'll let you jump in there.
And before we move on to David, Brother Price, could you, before I forget to ask, tell me how old you are and how long you've been a minister?
A preacher never shares his age. No, I'm joking. I'm just turned 38 years old.
Okay.
I've been in the church my entire life. Before I was even in the church, my mother, who was suffering from drug abuse, decided to, because the Church of Christ was so strong in Louisville, Kentucky, decided to put me and my brother, my biological brother, up for adoption in the agape. And I had two parents who were military in Fayetteville, North Carolina, who went there, got us, and raised us in the church. And I have been in the church my entire life. And so when we talk about prophetic agents who have been doing this work, I feel like God wanted me to be here doing this. And that's why I try to challenge myself to try to really think and pray and look for my mentorship. And I've been preaching a total of 4 years here at North Green Street, and total been in mentorship under Dr. R.C. Wells, Dr. Olu Shabazz, and under the leadership of the great preachers in the Church of Christ for over 10 years in ministry.
Appreciate that. Brother
David?
Watkins?
Yes, I want to take a moment and celebrate Dr. Price, who is the chief architect of the letter. The letter went through a few changes. One of the things that we wanted to make sure that we included in the letter was a a list of demands, so to speak. And one of the things that we did not want to do was just have a letter without making specific and targeted requests of what we wanted to see. And so we made those additions to those letters and wanted to ensure that those requests or demands, or however you word it, were in line with other national organizations who were making requests to see justice prevailed. One of the things I want to be sure and clear to include is that this is not just about George Floyd. This is about, decades of systemic racism and oppression against Black people. And so in the letter, we included the most recent occasions of Black people being killed. But certainly we want to be sure to notate that this is not just about these recent incidents. This is about years of what we feel like is systemic and blatant racism and oppression against Black people.
Okay, appreciate that. Brother Watkins, you mentioned specific requests or demands. Would you want to briefly outline what those are? We'll make the letter available for people to see, but I wondered if you might want to just briefly outline what it is that you did include in the letter.
Sure. So the letter was crafted before the Mr. Chauvin was brought to justice. And so one of the things that we identified in that letter was that we needed him to be arrested and charged with murder. And he has been since charged with third-degree murder. We make clear that those other officers who were bystanders and watched him, those officers need to be arrested and charged with, at the very least, negligence, in that they did not, move to stop Mr. Chauvin from murdering George Floyd. Some other things that we included in the letter is that Miss Breonna Taylor from Louisville, Kentucky, those officers need to be brought to justice for entering into the wrong apartment and shooting and killing her and arresting her boyfriend. We notated that in the case of Ahmaud Arbery, one of the things that we want to see continue is the obviously the appointment, and we support the appointment of an independent prosecutor, and we're requesting a change of venue for that trial. And so those are just some of the demands that we're looking for that are notated and outlined in the letter.
Okay, appreciate that. There's one line at the end that I wonder maybe if you could expound on. It says, "We agree that no longer will we accept the hollow words of our Caucasian counterparts without the investment of their actions concerning our fracturing. We expect for every believer in American, regardless of race, to recognize the value of Black lives and advocate for our fair and equitable treatment." What would the investment of actions mean on the part of your Caucasian brothers and sisters?
Let me address part of that, David, and I get right back to you. I've been doing several interviews from all over the place, and every interview that I do, I talk about the quiet white church who have been consenting with your quietness to the treatment that we've received all of these years. This is just a reenactment of the 60s when I worked with Dr. King, and they were quiet then. A few people got involved, but they were not validating the fact that people are mistreated. We couldn't get preachers to say anything about it from their pulpits. We act as if it was somebody else's problem and not ours. We're in this together. And so all of our Caucasian brethren who say they love God, who say they love righteousness, need to be standing up and echoing their voices with ours, and not just sitting behind the sacred desk on Sundays and acting as if this has not been going on for the last 100+ years in the church, and even the church itself. When you talk about the body of Christ, we are a middle-class white religion. And if we're a middle-class white religion, primarily our constituency, where are you when it comes to a man putting a knee on another black man's neck? Where are you? And I see them showing up now in numbers that I've never seen white people show up before. And I'm encouraged by that. But as a rule of thumb, the Church of Christ has not done that. That's not who we are. And so it's time to echo your voices, present your voices with ours, and say unrighteousness is unrighteousness. Let's not tolerate it anymore. Equity for everyone. Fair treatment of law. Let's wave the flag. Let's eat apple pie. Let's do this. Let's be the righteous nation that we've been saying we are. And to do that, put your voice with ours.
Yes, absolutely. That's predominantly what I mean. The truth is that it's far easier to say this is wrong, but not lead your people into righteousness. And so one of the things that we mean when we put in that letter, and I pinned that part of the statement, is that to say this is wrong without having a predominant and boisterous conversation with your members about how they can perpetuate systemic racism is just absolutely unacceptable. Many of these people who perpetuate the system of systemic racism, whether it be in the banking system or the law enforcement system or the school system, end up going to church somewhere. And the question is, what do they hear from their pulpits when they go there? Do they hear a message that perpetuates systemic racism, or do they hear a message that convicts them about how their racial biases contribute to the demoralization of society? And so that's what I mean when I say it's not just enough to post on Facebook that this is wrong. You know, we need to encourage white people to have a more predominant conversation that forces the issue about treating Black people with equity and fairness. You know, and so, you know, this whole idea that we are a post-racial society is just a complete lie. And so, you know, that's one of the things that we want to confront with our white brothers and sisters, is to not believe that we are beyond, you know, their responsibility to speak out and fight for our injustice. With privilege becomes power and responsibility. And we're simply asking that white people use their privilege and their power to better the lives of Black and brown people.
I want to add something to that if I can.
Sure.
Two things. One, I really think this is going to make a unique difference for us in seeing the other, because for so long, as has already been stated, to even advocate for issues that you know were wrong have not been considered or deemed acceptable. As a matter of fact, many would say that advocating when you have a shooting or advocating when there's been a justice issue is a sin. And I think that this letter is really bringing to the forefront the feelings that so many have had, while at the same time, I'm hearing that there are people signing their name to this letter who held a position before and have now, through this letter and this order of operation that's been set in place by these prophetic voices in these communities, these ministers, this midweek call, that, hey, the sin of racism is something I suffered with and was continued through the church. And I think that that's important. I hope that from this time period, when we move forward, that churches will not feel ashamed to celebrate cultural things that make us unique. And I think that from this conversation, somewhere down the line, will continue to be an understanding of why we are so different, but why we're so unified by the blood of Jesus Christ. Instead of condemning some of those cultural things that are just a part of who we are. So the white preacher doesn't have to advocate in the same sense as the Black preacher, because the Black preacher has a member or children or parents in his church that have a different skin tone, that face a different world. And I think that we're there. The second thing, I want to pick up what Dr. Blakney said, because I was one of those young persons who knew something was wrong and was called to this level and to this very narrow area of ministry, but couldn't find a lot of voices, couldn't find a lot of voices. And so we've been very familiar with the Blakneys, with the Wells, with the Franklin Florences, with the Fred Grays of the church, but we've never seen mass buy-in, and we've never seen people say, hey, these guys are doing stuff that needs to be done. And so, but now there's been a generation over the last 10 years of students who've gone to seminary, done different things, and they have been trained and they're prepared to be advocates. And that's another reason why this is such a special moment in history for us, because as you look up in most of these cities, there's some Church of Christ leader that's going to be visible and now feels that it's okay to be outspoken. Now they have somebody to talk to, like a Dr. Warren Blakney, to say, hey, how do I do this and do this right? What are some of the things I need to watch for? And even in the quiet moments where they're ridiculed for standing up for the marginalized, they even have somebody to lean on and find comfort from. So we're in a different time frame, and we certainly want to use this letter to reflect the voices of many who may not be there yet. They may not be ready to speak up, but if they sign their name, at least they can be heard in some sense.
Great. Dr. Blakeney, could I go back to you real quick and maybe ask a little bit about you? I think you mentioned the 60s and what you said earlier. So you've obviously been at this a long time. Maybe give me a little background on how long you've been in ministry, how long you've been involved in the civil rights issue, and just a little bit more about you personally and how your experience with the things that we're discussing today.
Absolutely. I first became involved in civil rights when I was 9 years old. I met Dr. King at First African Baptist Church in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. They were kids that were just getting kids together on the back of trucks to go pass out flyers. They wanted folks to vote and to get folks to vote. And so Dr. King stepped into the building. I was 9 with about maybe 50, 60 other children who had ridden there on the back of a bus, met him. And at 9 years old, knew there was something unique about him. So I got an opportunity to meet and work with him from 9 years old. And so he put in my heart the idea of ministry and speaking for those who are underprivileged, speaking for those who don't have a voice, is what he did. And there were a number of other guys in the room. I was in the room with Bobby Seals from the Black Panthers. It was at a historically Black college university, Stillman College in Tuscaloosa. I met all of the guys when they were a little bit older than me, and so that's where I began the journey. In fact, in the Birmingham bombing, when they bombed the church, we just left Birmingham when those kids were bombed and killed in the church. So I've been doing this now for over 50 years.
Wow.
Probably shouldn't be here because I probably should be dead. I've been threatened, called everything, labeled, every word you can think of, I've been called by my brethren as well as brethren on the outside, people on the outside. And so my history is civil rights. I came here, I took over the NAACP when that incident occurred. I set up the NAACP in Tennessee. I've done Operation Push, pulled it in. I work with Dr. Jackson on several things when he comes through here, Jesse Jackson. I've just been involved all the way from 1963. I've seen this before. The burning, the looting, the inner cities were burned. But out of 1963 came 1964 and the civil rights legislation, when we can buy houses, we want to buy them. We can ride not in the back of the bus, but in the front of the bus. As a matter of fact, for your paper, you need to know that in 1955, the folks who went to Dr. King and asked him to lead the 1955 bus boycott first went to a Church of Christ preacher by the name of Kelly Mitchell, because he was so articulate. And Kelly Mitchell said, I can't lead the 55 boycott because the Church of Christ is not there yet, and they'd fire me. Can you imagine what it had been like if one of our brethren had taken on that initiative?
Amen.
And so I knew K.K. Mitchell. He was one of the ones who helped baptize me. So I have a rich history in terms of speaking for equity, trying to make sure that we get laws that are fair. All of us have been stopped. Probably these young men have. I've been stopped so many times. Nothing more than just driving a nice car, being in a neighborhood at the wrong time. So when you come down to that, I know and have embraced and felt the racist overtones and things that have happened, not only in leading, but just as a Black man. So that's my history. That's where I'm from.
And I'm told that a preacher never tells his age, but do you tell yours?
Absolutely. I'm 67 years old. I'll be 68.
Okay. 68.
Yeah.
So that would have been, what year would that have been when you saw Dr. King?
It would have been 1961.
1961.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah, 61. I met him. And all the guys were there. I not only met him, I met Andy Young, who went on to be mayor. Jesse Jackson, who went on to do push. They were not those men then. They were just young lieutenants at that point. I met Stokely Carmichael, a student nonviolent coordinating committee. Stokely Carmichael of that day. All the guys would convene at historically Black colleges and universities and plan strategy for the movement. And most of those guys knew that they weren't going to make it through it, including Dr. King. But he thought the movement was greater than his life. And it ended up being so. Because every day, folks were killing folks, threatened, hanging. I saw a lot of things. I'll tell you this as I conclude. I've seen acid thrown at people. I've been in the crowd when dogs were turned on us. I've had water hoses on us as children at 9, 10 years old. I've seen guys jump out of cars, white guys jump out of cars intending with baseball bats to beat 12 and 13-year-old kids down and kill them. And we had to have cars driving through the neighborhood to prevent kids from being killed. I've seen that. But nothing has impacted me in the last 50 years like seeing a knee on the neck of that guy. I sat there and I prayed and I wished that he would get his knee off of that guy's neck so he could breathe. There was no sense of humanity. He dehumanized that guy. And tears almost came to my eyes because I have a grandson that's 15 years old. And he's Black and he has a suave about him. He's a speech about him. And how we present ourselves is different than white boys. And I could see my grandson with that guy with his knee on his neck. I couldn't quite get over that. So it compelled me again to get involved. So I've held news conferences. I'm on all kinds of Zoom calls because those of us with rich histories can relive it again and tell other guys how to get through it. So that's essentially who I am.
Can I add something on that? I think
Yes,
it's
sir.
also important in this article for many to know that the younger generation of leaders, we are not unorganized and we're not ill-informed. We have celebrated historians who have covered this from inception, going all the way back to Cassius, who was a Church of Christ preacher, who dealt with these issues, every single one of them, all the way up to the Warren Blakneys. We have dealt with, and we're well read. We have read all of Edward Robinson's writings to inform us. We talk with them. We have counseled with them. And so I don't want the readers to think that this is just us jumping up without us being organized. That's why we've been so careful to consult them in terms of the actions. There are a number of actions that we're trying to take as a group under the advisement of our mentors and our fathers in the faith, so that way when we step out, we can represent ourselves in a way that the church can say, oh yeah. And so my dissertation included something that Dr. Blakeney didn't mention, but it caught my eye when I was in middle school. And that was how he dealt with a shooting that occurred, a death that occurred in his community. And my parents told me, my mother who's from Oklahoma City and my grandmother who lives there now, told me about how he got the community together and how respected he was for operating like that. So it's in my dissertation. There are a lot of young men and women in the church who have professionally organized and done the reading, and now we're at a place where we're willing to advocate in a universal way. And so I want that to be mentioned because we have done our homework. and we're ready to be what God needs us to be as we learn more and we're cultivated. You know, Dr. Wells told me about the early meetings they had on race and reconciliation. He also warned me when I was younger, because at that time we were doing stuff around Trayvon Martin in New York and then Eric Garner, and he would watch and advise. And so this is not something that we're just jumping up and doing, but we are really consulting and trying to make sure that there's one clarion voice about this thing. And it makes me very humbled to know that I'm walking in the footsteps of a Warren Blakney, and working with other guys like Watkins. It's very humbling.
Well, I have another question or two, but before I forget, Brother Watkins, I've asked the other two a little bit about their background and how long they've been in ministry. Could you share a little bit of your experience as far as your personal background?
Yes, I started preaching at 10 years old. I was baptized at 9 in Daytona Beach, Florida, started preaching at 10, went to Southwestern Christian College, and from there, I spent 4.5 years with Dr. Blakeney in Tulsa, and kind of moved on from there. And so I really got involved in, I was trained and learned social justice and community activism from Dr. Blakeney during my time there, watched him closely and began to model some of those principles in the community that I'm in now. And much of my view about social justice and community activism comes from Dr. Blakeney's model. And then I got involved in politics as a Democratic Party chairperson and literally learned from there how policies move from a local level to a state level and then a national level. And so my real experience comes in moving policies through political structures and developing relationships on a local community level that will be able to enact systemic change. I'm on vacation now, but when I get back, I actually have 2 or 3 meetings set up with media and law enforcement to talk about how do we enact some policies on a local level that'll make our community safer. So that's my experience.
Okay, I appreciate that. Well, let me ask you, I guess the three of you, about the current state of events in the country. Is there a difference between protesting and rioting, and how do Christians look at what's happening right now and make sense of that? Because I think to some extent it's easy, you see the video and you're outraged, and then you see some of the things that have happened, and maybe it's easy to just say, well, I was upset about that, but they shouldn't be tearing things down. And kind of, how do you guys look at what's going on across the country?
So I think the 2 ways we need to view this, and I think a overview of the facts and what the local law enforcement officers are saying predominantly, and then specifically in Minneapolis, they're literally saying that the people who are creating the issues are out-of-state agitators, which would suggest then that the real people who are concerned about what happened to George Floyd are not the ones who are creating the issues. And I think that's important to note. But the real way I think the church needs to view this is that in any significant movement, you're going to have detractors that will attempt to take away from the legitimacy of the movement by polluting the message. And I don't think that the church needs to be deterred from focusing on what the real issue is. The real issue is that police and white people are killing Black people indiscriminately. And I think it's dangerous to focus on those who would attempt to poison the message of the rioters and the looters and all of that by focusing on the negative instead of the negative that precipitated the protest and the riots. So now let me deter, because I'm a preacher, to the biblical principle that I want to apply. I believe that we have a right to be angry. I believe that we have a legitimate reason that we're upset about, and upset enough to protest. And even those who are rioting and looting, while I do not agree or condone their rioting and looting, I understand the anger that these individuals have. And so I think the church needs to condemn the sin of rioting and looting, while also recognizing that this is not a part of the core message of those of us who are concerned about social justice. I think those who are watching needs to recognize that we need to focus our attention not on those who are rioting and looting, but focus our attention on the issue that caused the country to be so angry as it is now. Let me introduce another principle into this conversation, and that is the principle of righteous indignation. And that is the idea that it is okay to be angry. And if we follow the principle and the method and the model of Jesus, Jesus was angry when he went into the temple and saw them taking advantage of poor people. And he began and proceeded to flip over the tables and the money changers. And so there is a biblical principle of righteous indignation. I think what we need to do is we need to begin to focus our minds on what caused us to get to this point. And what caused us to get to this point is literally years, decades of white people killing Black people, and there being an eerie silence in the churches over this issue. And now all of a sudden, people are upset because there's rioting and looting. And once again, I don't agree with that. But I also think that if you're more angry about a building being burned down than you are about a Black man being killed, in the streets, then your priorities are off. Those buildings have insurance. They can go and build those buildings again. But these men and women's lives who were taken at the hands primarily by police or these white vigilantes will never get their lives back. And so that's my approach, that's my view. And I know that is a controversial view, but in my mind, it doesn't make it any less right.
Dr. King said that rioting is the language of the unheard. It's an outgrowth of their pain. And in the 60s, that's exactly what was done. I saw Detroit burned. I saw Los Angeles burned. I saw so many inner cities in Newark, New Jersey burned because the unheard have a tendency to express themselves the only way they know how. And it was only through that process of all of the ugliness, all of the pain, that people gave an ear to what's wrong with these people. Why are they burning their own communities? And in a sense of, we said last night, I was talking to some people, it's not so much their community, because they don't own very little in those inner cities. It's owned by other people. That doesn't make it right, but it's a part of a movement of a folk who are in pain. And Dr. King said it best, it's the language of the unheard. Listen to what we have to say. Listen to the pain that we've experienced all of these years. Let's have a conversation. But until, I want to ask you a question, though you are the interviewer. Until that video the other night, did you really understand the impact of what African-American males experienced? Or did that video in our face, with the way Mr. Chauvin killed Mr. George, did you really understand what Black men were going through until you saw that video? I think it brought a point home to many whites who had been in denial about, oh no, it's not that bad. He probably did something, or something was wrong, or he probably stole something, or the whole story's not been told, or they're just bad people anyway, they're violent. Until you saw that video. And what did that video do to you? I want to become the interviewer for a moment as you interview me. How did that video make you feel when you saw it?
Well, obviously outraged like everyone else, but and I'm still not sure that you said until that video, did you understand? And I'm still not sure that I'm in a position to understand. I mean, I think I may be in a little better position given that I've been writing about a lot of this for years and going to places like Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore and Dallas after Brother Botham John was shot in his apartment there. But I guess my real answer would be I'm still struggling to understand and wouldn't pretend to understand that experience.
Let me jump in. I don't mean to, I want to say something because I think something is important to mention here. You know, and I'm at this place where I feel like I need to be very direct. You know, the truth is that white people excuse other white people with lawlessness, but don't give black people a pass. So, you know, let's think about it. Just a month or so ago, you know, all these white men stormed the state house in Michigan with rifles and literally refused to leave, you know, because they didn't believe in the public health crisis of COVID-19. Several years ago, white people took over this government property and occupied it for literally days, you know, with guns and things of that nature. And the situation was ended peacefully, you know. And my argument is that we literally have, let's go to Charlottesville. We literally have, you know, just mountain of evidence where public perception about white lawlessness is different than the public perception of black lawlessness. And so, you know, you don't see this public outcry with white people on the internet about, you know, how could they occupy this government property and refuse to leave for days, you know, nearly a month, and nobody is shot, or you didn't see go in there and shoot them all dead. You didn't see any of that when these white men took over the Michigan House. And, you know, the president tweeted, you know, the governor needs to make a deal with them. You didn't see go in there and shoot them all dead. When Charlottesville happened, the president literally says these are good people. And these are literally white supremacists that took over Charlottesville. And the president says, these are good people, you know, and we need to work with them. But yet, when you see what the world perceives to be black lawlessness, or when this is associated with black issues, now the narrative is, oh, this is horrible. All of that looting and rioting, oh, it's just horrible, you know. And the president literally tweets out a threat that says, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. You know, it's. So one of my things, and this may sound a bit radical, but one of my things about this is that white people excuse lawlessness when it's other white people involved. But when it's black people, then the narrative changes that we're criminals and we're thugs and, you know, we need to shoot them, and, you know, we're sending in the National Guard and all of these, you know, different, you know, just violent responses to black pain. And so, you know, while once again, I go on record to say I don't agree with the rioting and looting, I don't think it's productive. I just want to highlight that one of the reasons why we're calling on white people to speak up with their voices is because many white people are not being consistent. And this is not about white versus black. I don't want to sound like that. But what this is about is calling white people to use their privilege to be consistent in the language that they have whenever there is a conversation about illegal behavior associated with the movement. And let's not play like we don't know our history. This country was founded on the principles of looting and taking by force and robbery and all of that, you know. And so That's the real reason, a real thing about how I feel about it. Let's not play like, Black people are destroying this country with rioting and looting associated with this issue.
I would like to echo what you were saying, David, because I share some of those same convictions. And I think historically, where the church has been at, when our interviewer talked about feeling a certain way but not knowing how to act on it, I think that our church has been constipated. We know that it's wrong, but we haven't been able to get rid of the bile that's in us. And we're in a season right now where I think this letter, for whatever reason, and I have my theory on all these layers. I don't know if some people are finally saying that these type of things are wrong because their constituents are saying it, or they've been waiting on someone else. But something about speaking and saying something is wrong is so powerful. It's for me, the letter without local advocacy would not be able to bring me the type of peace that I need. So I think there's been a constipation where there needs to be a royal flush. And we've been and maybe Dr. Blakeney could speak to this, but I remember on our calls how you have had to help preachers who maybe have not arrived at that place, or they've been angry and they haven't dealt with the issue yet, and they didn't know how to, or didn't know that they could, or didn't know it was permissible. There has been a level of lamenting on those calls, whether we identify it or not, of people saying, you know what, I didn't do it before, but I'm going to do it now. And there's had to have been a lot of conversation around that. I also want to echo so I'm calling for a royal flush of this evil constipation that has been in our churches forever, and for a number of reasons. Then I want to also talk about the tipping point, because historians, we talk about the tipping point. And in my work, When Discontent Turns to Anger, that was the title of my dissertation. How do we advocate when we know something is wrong? And I followed the life of Cassius and how he got out there and how he was best friends with some of our greatest leaders of that time. But we have seen the tipping point. When discontent turns to anger, you have these spontaneous combustions, right? You don't know how long it's going to burn. You don't know necessarily where it's going to happen. Some writers even talk about how in some cities, and I don't know if you two can feel this, but you can almost feel it in the air. Some cities you can almost hear it. You're used to a certain noise, you're used to a certain sound in the cities where people are moving all around. In New York, I could hear it more, but you can almost feel it and know that we're getting ready to have a spontaneous combustion. And I think a lot of us, based on other events that led up to this, we had already seen the tipping point in the incident before, and we knew something was coming, and we knew we was getting ready for a boom. We didn't know when, we didn't know how, but we knew it was coming. And then last thing I want to say is, Dr. Blakeney said something that's so important, that when we see these incidents happen, a lot of our parents, a lot of those who have seen this, it wasn't during my time frame, but I saw the photos and it still made me cringe. When we saw Emmett Till's casket open, then we felt it. When we saw water hoses during the civil rights movement, then we felt it. These, so while we hate that happened, I'm not sure, as you guys are saying, that we would have been ready to come to this place of repentance and lamenting had we not been able to visually see it, although we knew it was already occurring. And then I think that we really have to pay attention now to the actions that are going forth. I know today there's a blackout on Instagram, and if we were to take it and put these things in the graphs and see who's participating, I think we would see this overarching number of people, white, black, Puerto Rican, Haitian, that are participating in it, and they're trying to get that constipation out because they know it's wrong.
I appreciate it, brothers. Appreciate the talking and the honest discussion. I'm wondering, I think Dr. Blakeney kind of mentioned a little optimism that maybe after all these years, you're seeing maybe something special about this moment? Am I interpreting that right? That maybe that, you know, we've been through similar situations in the past, but maybe there is optimism that this time real change could actually occur?
I think we're on that foundation. I think we can. I want to say this. When I was involved, there were some Jews. Jews actually sponsored the movement to a large degree in the 60s. Every time Dr. King was locked up, we didn't have the resources in our community to get him out. So there were a number of Jews who actually did the underwriting for Dr. King getting out of jail. Fred Gray, who's a member of the Church of Christ, I'm going to be with him a little bit later on in the week. He was Dr. King's attorney. He also represented the guys who were injected with syphilis. And he's a good friend of mine. He's an attorney. So I'm talking with him. But whites were not.
And Rosa Parks' attorney as well, I believe.
Yeah, yes, he was. So, but whites were not as heavily involved. There were some who died in the movement, but they were not as heavily involved. This time, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, 86% white. Most of the people rioting, most of the folks marching, most of the people protesting are Caucasian people because of that video. I mean, it was so compelling. And that's why I asked you the question. How can you sit as an individual with God in you and watch someone literally die before your eye when all you have to do is reposition him or take your knee off? That's in your face kind of stuff. And if God is in you, that did something to you as an individual to say something needs to be done. And so I think the young whites, I think many of them are now getting involved in this process. And with young people, there's hope. Hope does spring eternal in my soul because it can be different. It doesn't have to be. The other thing that in the next 20 years, it is said there will not be a majority race because there's so much intermingling of the races. And if that be true, that it's not a dominant race, we're going to have to learn how to get along with one another. And I see that happening more and more and more. So I'm excited about the possibilities of seeing us work together as people. Dr. King said it best. He hoped the day would come when his children and other white children could play together and enjoy just being Americans and enjoy being people. I see a little promise in that about what's going on right now. That's the hope that I have, that with this particular incident, good can come out of it. But I do say all this process, and I'm saying process by the looting, the pain, the marches, all of that is synonymous with an outgrowth of something different. And I see that in a holistic fashion from my experiences in the past. But yeah, I do see some promise and I see some hope. I see promise in these young men because as I get older and fade off the scene, these are going to be the guys carrying the banner from now on. You know, I'm not going to be doing this a whole lot longer. I'm doing it now and working with them so that they can do the greater works than I've even thought about doing. And we need that. We need guys who are activists, who will actually take it to the streets and say, this is what we've got to do to make life better for African Americans. And the male, as I close my thoughts, the African American male has been the most hunted. He's been the most despised. He's been the most despicable specimen of flesh that you can think of in our history. We have actually been wrapped in this brown flesh of ours, and in doing the skin, we've had to endure this every day. Charles Baldwin said, Mr. Baldwin said, to be black is to be angry every day. And I think he was saying that you have to know that every day is an experience for African American males. We deal with it every day of our lives. You don't know that you're going to make it back home from a police stop with a tag been out, light been out. You don't know, because the most dangerous interaction you will have in your community, other than with another black guy, is going to be with a white police officer. That's data from the NAACP. So I see a little hope, and I'm hopeful that what I see is going to come to pass.
Last year, I was driving down the road. My 7-year-old son, he's 8 now, but last year he was 7. We were driving down the road. Speed limit changed on me. I was speeding. Cop pulled me over. the first thing that my son said to me is, Daddy, is he going to shoot you? Now, this is a 7-year-old boy. A 7-year-old boy. I don't know how many white families are having to have a conversation with their 7-year-old child. But I don't play CNN around him. I don't play Fox News. I don't play the news around him. I try to let him be a child. A 7-year-old boy who isn't exposed to all of these things, at least in my house, to be perceptive enough to know what's going on in the world, to ask the question that when his daddy gets pulled over by the police, is he going to get shot? Is all that I need to know about what he knows about being Black in America.
You okay, David?
Mm.
Sorry
Yep.
about that. I'm just trying to keep myself together over here, just talking to them. And, just to think if our white brothers and sisters knew the conversation of coding that our parents have had to have with us. And Dr. Blakeney, I can't imagine what that conversation was like for you, because you're just a few years older than us. But we had to have conversations, and we were Christians who were supposed to have all the rights and privileges appertaining to a child of God. And our mothers had to, and our fathers had to have conversations with us on how to wear this blackness, even though we were children of God in a country where privilege and racism prevail. And we have been doing that. And I'm not sure if they know just how we've been doing it. That's why, and I want to go off the record with this. That's why I'm insulted.
The recording real quick.
Oh, you're what?
I'm recording, so if we're going to go off the record, I'm going to need to.
Well, from sin, and one of the elements of that sin for me has been racism. So there have been many times, especially around these incidents, when I have worshiped God and I have asked him to protect me and to allow me the opportunity to make it home at night. Working in this venue and in this avenue under our fathers, I have had to ask God to keep me safe and let no one not shoot me while I try to do what you've asked me to do. So there is trauma right now. If you're Black or brown, or if you're even, and I would even stretch it, even those who have taken on the responsibility of raising Black children, multicultural families, there's a level of trauma right now where when these things happen, we are hurt and we're almost crippled to a certain effect. And it hurts really bad. I'm going over the trauma with this I Can't Breathe tag again. And I was just at Eric Gardner leading the rally in New York for them. I'm saying, again, the same thing, the same way. And so I think that for me, I feel hopeful because I've got mentors and I've got a church who's finally willing to say, this is a problem. And I know that with the help of our fathers and our mentors, they will help prepare us to be the leaders that we need to be. And so I'm hopeful in that vein. But I don't know if some people, and I don't know if some are just wanting to have a kumbaya moment. And then after this fails, they're going to tell us again that they can contain our Blackness and we have to do everything like they do it. And they won't understand our plight, or if this is going to be something that they're going to go with. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I'm in the middle of this.
One of my favorite pieces of writing, and I'm done with this, is I Too Sing America. I'm the darker brother that sent me to the kitchen to eat. But when you look at that, my daughter, every time I walk out the door, because my name is Warren Blakney in this city, fears whether her daddy will make it back home because I'm so vocal. I will not sit still and sit quiet while injustice continues. I will not. I've had threats in the paper. I've had threats echoed to me all over the place. Even now, as I did a news conference the other week, I've had threats again. God has kept me safe this far. And if it were to mean that I'm no longer here because I spoke truth to power, I'm good with that, because truth doesn't change because power doesn't like it. You continue to speak truth to power, and it makes a difference for the lives of some people. But every day I walk in this skin, I don't know whether I'm going to make it back home or not because of cardiac arrest or because of I have some pre-existing condition, but I don't know that some white person ain't going to decide I've lived long enough and talked long enough and I'm done. And so I've resolved with my children that if that takes place, your daddy gave his life to making sure other folks' lives are better. I'm not heroic, I'm not all of that, but the cause is greater than the man. And the cause I'm dealing with is greater than me. And so a paper like yours has power. I did television news for 2 years. I know the power of a paper. I know the slanting that can be done with the paper. I know what the media can do when they slant things to make you say stuff you didn't say. And I'm depending upon good journalism and good people to say the way we say it, what we say, and the message will get across. It'll stand for itself. So the Christian Chronicle, I've read for a while. I know some of the folks. When Dr. Bowers was alive, he was my brother-in-law. He worked with folks at Christian Chronicle. You've always been pretty fair in what you write and what you say. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing this interview this morning, because so many people are not fair when they write. And so I don't give interviews. I just write my own stuff. So I know that it'll be a good writing and a good piece when you get it together, if you decide to do it. But it's a story that needs to be told. And your periodical, your paper is just one of the many mediums that we need to get the story told. Because again, we're affiliated with the body of Christ. I'm hopeful that the body of Christ will tell the story so that other folk can read it and say, okay, I need to get on board because I have been this way and our country needs to change. There needs to be equity. That's what I'm hopeful with the Christian Chronicle.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'm also planning to post the full video here so people can read what we write, but they can also see exactly what you said and judge whether we quoted you accurately, which we obviously will do our best to do. We've been at this about an hour. I don't want to keep you guys forever. Anything else that I haven't asked or that you feel like would be important to say before we do wrap this up?
David?
No, I appreciate the opportunity for you to cover this story and produce this. I will email to you later today the completed letter with all of the new names that are associated with it. I'll send you that email today.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, brothers, I appreciate it. It's an honor to talk to you. Dr. Blakeney, it's an honor to hear your story after all this many years. So thank you very much, and I look forward to talking with y'all again soon.
Appreciate you so very much.
Okay, thank you.